I will never forget the sound of champagne glasses clinking against marble countertops, my mother's shrill laughter echoing through what used to be Grandpa Oliver's study, and the hollow emptiness in my father's eyes as he toasted to their greatest con. They had left him at LAX, alone, without a driver, without a real ticket, with nothing but a suitcase and decades of generosity thrown away like yesterday's trash, and they celebrated it like a victory. The Beverly Hills mansion glittered that night, every chandelier blazing as if trying to outshine the stars themselves. My parents had wasted no time transforming Grandpa's home into their personal monument to greed. The Persian rugs he had collected during his travels were now trampled under stiletto heels. The walls that once held family photos now displayed modern art pieces my mother had purchased that very afternoon, price tags still tucked discreetly behind the frames. I sat in the corner of the living room, nursing a glass of sparkling water while my parents' friends congratulated them on their shrewd business sense. The irony was suffocating. These people, draped in designer clothes and fake smiles, had no idea they were celebrating elderly abuse. Or maybe they did. Maybe that was the point. My mother, Susan, swept through the room like a tornado of silk and diamonds. Her voice carried across the space, sharp and triumphant. She raised her glass high, and the room quieted to hear her speak. Finally, we have what should have been ours all along. That old man didn't know what hit him. My father, Richard, laughed from his position by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a tumbler of whiskey that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. That's right, honey. He was going to give everything to charity anyway, but nobody deserves it more than us. This house, the stocks, the accounts, all of it is finally where it belongs. A woman in a red dress I didn't recognize chimed in, "You two are absolutely brilliant. Playing the long game, that takes real strategy." The smell of new money, that peculiar mix of expensive cologne and desperation, was choking me. It clung to every surface, suffocating the warm memories of Sunday dinners and bedtime stories that had once filled these rooms. I thought about Grandpa reading to me in his leather chair, the one my mother had already ordered removed and replaced with some minimalist monstrosity she saw in a magazine. My phone vibrated in my lap. Once. Twice. Then it didn't stop. I glanced down at the screen and felt my blood run cold. 29 missed calls, all from Grandpa Oliver. He never called that much. He was from a generation that believed phone calls should be reserved for important matters, not idle chatter. 29 calls meant something was desperately wrong. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the notifications, voicemails I hadn't had time to check, text messages that simply said, "Clara, please call me." And then, ominously, "I need you to remember something." I looked up at my parents, still basking in their stolen glory, and a wave of nausea crashed over me. They had done something worse than I had imagined. And Grandpa was trying to reach me, trying to warn me, trying to tell me something before it was too late. The party continued around me, a grotesque carnival of greed, but I was no longer present. My mind raced back to that morning, to the car ride to LAX, to the moment everything had started to unravel. We had picked Grandpa up at dawn. My father had insisted I come along, saying it would be good for me to spend time with him before his trip. At the time, I thought it was a rare moment of familial consideration. Now I understood it was camouflage, a way to make their cruelty look like care. Grandpa had climbed into the back seat beside me, moving slowly. At 87, he was still sharp, still dignified, but age had made him vulnerable in ways he would never admit. He wore his favorite navy cardigan, the one with leather patches on the elbows that my grandmother had given him decades ago. His suitcase was old but well-maintained, covered in stickers from countries I dreamed of visiting. The drive was tense. My mother chatted nervously about the weather, about traffic, about nothing important. My father was silent, his jaw set in that way it got when he was executing a plan. I sat next to Grandpa, studying his profile. He stared out the window, watching Los Angeles slide past, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe. Or was it resignation? As we merged onto the 405, Grandpa turned to me. His eyes, still bright blue despite his age, locked onto mine with an intensity that made me hold my breath. "Clara, do you remember what I told you when your grandmother passed? About family?" I nodded slowly. Of course I remembered. It was one of the most important conversations we had ever had. I had been 16, devastated by the loss of my grandmother, and Grandpa had held my hand in his study and said something that changed how I saw the world. "You said family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's who shows up when things get hard." He smiled, but it was tinged with something that looked like farewell. That's right, sweetheart. Family is a choice. And sometimes, the people we choose to love end up choosing something else. Before I could ask what he meant, my father pulled up to the departure terminal. The car had barely stopped before he was out, popping the trunk with more force than necessary. I watched through the window as he grabbed Grandpa's suitcase and essentially threw it onto the curb. The old leather bag hit the concrete with a thud that made me wince. My mother turned in her seat, her smile as plastic as the surgery she denied having. There you go, Oliver. You're all set. The e-ticket is already on your phone. You'll figure it out, you always do. Grandpa's hand was on the door handle when I finally found my voice. Wait, aren't we going to help him inside? Make sure he finds his gate? My father's response was clipped, businesslike. He's a grown man, Clara. He's traveled the world. I think he can handle LAX. Something in his tone made my skin crawl. This wasn't concern for Grandpa's independence. This was abandonment dressed up as confidence. Grandpa squeezed my hand once, quickly, and then he was gone, stepping out of the car with more dignity than my parents had shown in years. I watched through the back window as he stood on the curb, a solitary figure amid the chaos of travelers and taxis and buses. He pulled out his phone, and I knew, somehow, that he was trying to call me. My father didn't wait. He pulled away from the curb before Grandpa had even picked up his suitcase. I twisted in my seat, watching my grandfather grow smaller and smaller, until he was just another elderly person lost in the machinery of modern travel. Dad, we should go back. He's going to need help with security, with finding the gate. He'll be fine, my father said, his voice flat. We have things to do. Those things, apparently, included going home and throwing a party to celebrate what they had done. Because that morning, before we had even picked Grandpa up, they had convinced him to sign papers. Papers they said were just updates to his estate planning. Papers that were supposed to give them power of attorney for health decisions. Papers that they believed transferred everything he owned into their names. Now, sitting in the living room with my phone burning in my hand and my parents laughing with their friends, I understood the full scope of their betrayal. They hadn't just taken his money. They had taken his dignity. They had reduced a man who had built an empire, who had employed thousands, who had given millions to charity, to a confused old person abandoned at an airport. And they were celebrating. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and made my way toward the hallway. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to call Grandpa back and make sure he was okay. But as I passed my father, I heard him speaking to one of his friends in a low voice that he clearly thought I couldn't hear. The old fool thought he could outlast us. Thought his precious charities would get everything. Well, surprise, Dad, blood comes first. The casual cruelty in his voice was like a slap. This was my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had helped me with homework, who had once seemed like a hero. When had he become this? Or had he always been this, and I had just been too naive to see it? I made it to my old bedroom, the one my parents hadn't yet redecorated, and locked the door behind me. My hands shook as I tried to call Grandpa back. It rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. Terror seized me. What if something had happened to him at the airport? What if he had fallen, or gotten confused, or worse? What if my parents' cruelty had led to something unforgivable? I was about to call again when I noticed an envelope on my desk. Cream-colored, heavy paper, my name written on the front in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. When had he left this? It must have been recently, maybe the last time he had visited, weeks ago, before everything had fallen apart. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single card with a message that made my breath catch. Keep your heart clean, Clara. When the storm comes, you'll need it. What storm? What was he talking about? And why did it feel like a warning, like he had known exactly what was coming? Downstairs, the party continued. I could hear my mother's laughter, high-pitched and manic. Then my father's phone rang, loud, insistent. I heard him answer, heard his voice shift from jovial to confused. Who is this? How did you get this number? A pause. Then, what do you mean, enjoy the house while it's still ours? My heart started pounding. Something was happening. Something they hadn't anticipated. I opened my bedroom door just enough to hear better. My parents were in the foyer now, their voices rising. The party guests had gone quiet, sensing the shift in atmosphere. That's impossible, my mother was saying, her voice shrill. We have the paperwork. It's all legal. Our lawyer checked everything. Then call him back, my father snapped. Call him right now. I crept to the top of the stairs and looked down. My parents were huddled over my father's phone, their faces pale under the chandelier light. My mother's hands shook as she tried to dial a number. That's when my phone lit up again. Not a call this time, but a text message. From the family group chat that Grandpa had insisted we maintain, even though my parents barely participated in it. The message was from him, sent just an hour after we had dropped him off at the airport. I hope you'll take care of my home the way I took care of you. Attached was a photo, slightly blurry, of a document. It looked like the transfer papers my parents had made him sign, but something was different. There was a section that had been intentionally obscured, like he had covered it with his thumb when taking the picture. But I could make out a few words. Charitable trust, irrevocable, Oliver Steele Foundation. My mind raced. What did this mean? Had Grandpa known what my parents were planning? Had he protected himself somehow? Another text came through, this time from an unknown number. Miss Clara Steele, please be at the residence tomorrow at 9 a.m. There are matters that require your attention. Regards, David Chen, attorney at law. I stared at the message, then at the chaos unfolding below me. My parents were in full panic mode now, shouting at each other, blaming each other, trying desperately to reach their lawyer who apparently wasn't answering. And then I understood. Grandpa hadn't been confused at all. He had been strategic. He had let my parents think they had won, let them celebrate, let them reveal exactly who they really were. And now, whatever he had planned, it was about to unfold. The storm he had warned me about wasn't coming. It was already here. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay in bed listening to my parents' frantic phone calls, their arguments, their increasingly desperate attempts to figure out what was happening. Around 3 a.m, I heard my mother crying. Not sad crying, but angry, frustrated crying. The tears of someone who had counted their chickens before they hatched and was now watching them fly away. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray through my bedroom window, I got dressed in silence. I chose carefully. A simple black dress, professional but not flashy. My grandmother's pearl earrings, the watch Grandpa had given me for my college graduation, armor, in its own way. Downstairs, my parents looked like they hadn't slept either. My father's shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. My mother's makeup from the night before was smeared, giving her a ghoulish appearance. They sat at the kitchen table, a place that used to smell like my grandmother's pancakes, and now reeked of desperation. "Did you get a message from a lawyer?" my father asked when he saw me. His voice was hoarse. "Yes." "Do you know what this is about?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how I had never noticed the weakness in his eyes before. "I think we're about to find out." At exactly 9 a.m., a black SUV pulled up to the gate. Through the window, I watched a man in an impeccable suit step out, carrying a leather briefcase. He was Asian, probably in his 40s, with an air of quiet authority. 2 other people emerged from the vehicle. A woman with short silver hair who moved like someone accustomed to command, and a younger man who was clearly an assistant. My father opened the door before they could knock. "Who are you? What's this about?" The man in the suit smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning. I'm David Chen, senior partner at Chen & Associates. This is Elena Rios, private investigator, and my associate, James Park. May we come in?" "This is our house," my mother said, trying for imperious but landing somewhere around hysterical. "You can't just show up here." "Actually, Mrs. Steele, that's precisely what we need to discuss, the ownership of this property." My father stepped aside, and the 3 of them entered. I stayed in the background, watching, my heart hammering so hard I thought everyone could hear it. We all moved to the living room, the same room where last night's party had taken place. In the morning light, it looked tawdry, empty glasses on every surface. The smell of stale alcohol and expensive perfume. My mother's new art pieces looked garish and desperate. David Chen remained standing, opening his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Let me get straight to the point. Mr. Oliver Steele has asked me to inform you that there have been some misunderstandings regarding the transfer of his assets." "Misunderstandings?" my father exploded. "We have signed documents. He transferred everything to us." "You have documents, yes. Documents that Mr. Steele signed, that is true." David Chen pulled out a folder and laid it on the coffee table. "However, the documents you believe transfer personal ownership to you actually transfer all assets to the Oliver Steele Charitable Foundation, a trust established approximately 1 hour after you left Mr. Senzo Steele at LAX airport yesterday morning." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my mother's face going through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then, finally, horror. "That's not possible," she whispered. "We saw what he signed. It was clear." "Was it?" Elena Rios spoke for the first time, her voice crisp and professional. She pulled out a tablet and turned it toward my parents. Because what I see, what I documented over the past 6 weeks at Mr. Steele's request, is a pattern of coercion, manipulation, and elder abuse. The tablet screen showed a series of text messages between my parents, messages I had never seen, where they discussed their plans to get Grandpa to sign over his assets. Where they laughed about how easy it would be to convince an old man to trust his son, where they calculated exactly how much everything was worth and how they would divide it. My father's face went red, then white. You spied on us? We documented criminal activity. David Chen corrected smoothly. There's a difference. Mr. Steele suspected what you were planning and took appropriate legal measures to protect both his assets and his intentions. He pulled out another document, this one official-looking with multiple seals and signatures. The papers you had Mr. Steele sign were legitimate transfer documents. However, they were transfers to the Oliver Steele Charitable Foundation, not to you personally. The foundation, which was legally established and registered before he signed anything, now owns this house. His stock portfolio, his bank accounts, and all other assets previously held in his personal name. My mother's legs seemed to give out. She collapsed onto the sofa, her designer dress crumpling around her. He tricked us. That bastard tricked us. No, ma'am, David Chen said, and now there was steel in his voice. He simply allowed you to reveal your true intentions. He gave you every opportunity to choose love over greed. You chose greed. Elena Rios moved to stand beside the lawyer. I have 6 weeks of surveillance footage. Miss and Mr. Steele. 6 weeks of you discussing how to manipulate your father, how to isolate him, how to convince him he was losing his mental faculties when he was perfectly sharp, how to get him to sign papers he wouldn't normally sign. She tapped her tablet again, and I heard my parents' voices coming from the speaker. This time it was a phone conversation, one I recognized from about a month ago. My mother was telling someone, probably a friend, how easy it had been to make Grandpa doubt himself, how they had started hiding his reading glasses and pretending he had forgotten where he put them. How they had convinced him to start limiting his activities because he was too old and might hurt himself. It was gaslighting, systematic and cruel. And hearing it laid out like this, in their own words, made me feel sick. My father found his voice, though it shook. You can't do this. We'll fight this in court. No judge will allow a transfer made under these circumstances. David Chen's smile was thin. Actually, Mr. Steele, I encourage you to try. Because the transfer was made with full legal disclosure, witnessed by 3 attorneys, and documented in exhaustive detail. But please, do take this to court. I would love for a judge to hear the recordings we have. I would love for the Los Angeles Times to hear about how you abandoned your elderly father at an airport with no actual ticket, no transportation arranged, and no care for his well-being. We gave him an e-ticket, my mother protested weakly. Elena Rios smiled. It was not a kind smile. You gave him a screenshot of a flight that was already fully booked, with no actual confirmation number. LAX security found him 4 hours later, sitting in a terminal, still trying to check in for a flight that didn't exist. If Mr. Steele hadn't had his own resources, hadn't had me waiting with actual transportation, your father would have spent the night in an airport, confused and alone. I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of these people who had raised me, but whom I suddenly didn't recognize at all. David Chen turned to me for the first time. Miss Clara Steele, your grandfather has asked me to give you this. He handed me an envelope, much larger than the note I had found in my room. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with Grandpa's signet ring, the one that had belonged to his father before him. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and pulled out the letter inside. His handwriting, still strong despite his age, filled 2 pages of heavy cream paper. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then you've witnessed the culmination of a lesson I wish I didn't have to teach. Your parents wanted my home, my money, my legacy. I've given them exactly what they asked for. Empty walls and hollow victories. But you, my dear girl, you deserve more than the pain of watching people you love destroy themselves with greed. So I'm giving you something different. I'm giving you the truth. The truth is that your father and mother stopped being my family the moment they chose to see me as an asset rather than a person. The truth is that I knew about their plans for months. The truth is that I let them proceed, because sometimes people need to fall completely before they can understand what they've lost. But you, Clara, you kept your heart clean. You questioned. You felt uncomfortable. You called me back. And that is why, When they realize what they've truly lost, I want you to come find me. I'll be waiting at the place where honesty still has value. The address is enclosed. Come alone. Come when you're ready to talk about real inheritance. Not money, but values. Not property, but purpose. I love you, sweetheart. I always have. And I always will. Grandpa. Tucked behind the letter was a small card with an address I didn't recognize. Downtown Los Angeles. High floor of a tower I knew had recently changed ownership. I had seen the news about it but hadn't paid attention to the details. I looked up to find everyone watching me. My parents looked destroyed, broken in a way that might have made me feel pity if I hadn't just learned the extent of their cruelty. David Chen and Elena Rios watched me with professional detachment. And James Park, the young assistant, actually looked sympathetic. "What happens now?" I asked, surprised. My voice was steady. David Chen straightened his suit jacket. "Now, Mr. and Mrs. Steele have 24 hours to vacate this property. The foundation has arranged temporary housing for them, a modest apartment in Burbank, fully furnished and paid for 6 months. After that, they'll need to support themselves." "We'll be homeless," my mother wailed. "No," Elena Rios corrected. "You'll be exactly where most Americans start, with nothing but your own resources and the need to work for your living. Mr. Steele is not cruel. He's not leaving you destitute. He's simply removing the cushion you tried to steal." My father stood up, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over. You haven't heard the last from us." David Chen's expression didn't change. "Mr. Steele, I have documented evidence of elder abuse, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation. I have witnesses who will testify that you deliberately abandoned your father at an airport with no valid travel documents. I have recordings of you plotting to gaslight him into thinking he was losing his mental faculties." He paused, letting that sink in. "You can absolutely make this a public fight. I welcome it. Because the moment you do, I will ensure that every news outlet in Los Angeles knows exactly what you tried to do. Your names will become synonymous with elderly abuse. No country club will have you. No business will employ you. Your friends, those people who were here celebrating last night, will run from you like you're radioactive." The fight went out of my father like air from a balloon. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 53 years and then some. "Or," David Chen continued, his voice softer now, "you can accept the terms, mister. Steele has offered, live quietly in the apartment provided, find jobs, rebuild your lives with actual work instead of stolen wealth, and maybe, just maybe, figure out what matters." He looked at me again. "Miss Steele, your grandfather would like to see you at your convenience. The address is in his letter. Everything else that needs to be said can be said then." With that, he nodded to Elena and James, and the three of them walked out. The sound of the door closing behind them was very final. For a long moment, none of us moved. Then my mother started crying, real crying this time, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and irreparable. My father just stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "Clara," my mother started, reaching for me. "Clara, you have to understand. We were going to share it with you. We were going to make sure you were taken care of." I stepped back, out of her reach. By destroying the one person in this family who actually loved me unconditionally? "We love you," she protested. "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Or do you love what I represent? Another asset? Another person to manipulate?" I didn't wait for an answer. I walked past them, through the foyer, past the expensive art and the designer furniture, and all the trappings of wealth they had tried to steal. I walked out the front door of what used to be my grandfather's house and didn't look back. The address Grandpa had left me was for the Grant Industries building downtown, formerly Steel Industries before he had sold it years ago. The tower rose 52 stories into the Los Angeles sky, all glass and steel and power. I hadn't realized he had bought it back. Security was expecting me. They gave me a visitor badge and directed me to a private elevator that went straight to the 52nd floor. As the elevator climbed, I watched the city spread out below me, growing smaller and less significant with each passing second. The doors opened directly into a reception area that was all understated elegance. And there, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over all of Los Angeles, was Grandpa. He looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. But when he turned to face me, his eyes were bright and clear and full of life. "I wondered when you'd come," he said, his voice the same warm rumble I had known all my life. "You knew they would do it," I said. "It wasn't a question. You knew what they were planning." He nodded slowly and gestured to a seating area. We sat across from each other, the city sprawling behind him like a kingdom. I've built a lot of things in my life, Clara. Buildings, companies, wealth. But the one thing I couldn't build was character in my son. I tried. God knows I tried. But at some point, you have to accept that people make their own choices. So you let them think they had won? I let them reveal who they really were. There's a difference. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. 6 months ago, I started noticing things. Small things at first. Questions about my will. Suggestions that I was forgetting things I hadn't actually forgotten. Pressure to sign papers I didn't need to sign. He pulled out his phone and showed me a folder of screenshots. Texts between my parents, between my father and a lawyer I didn't recognize, between my mother and her friends. All of it spelling out their plan in explicit detail. I hired Elena Rios to investigate. She confirmed my suspicions. Your parents were planning to have me declared incompetent, take control of my assets, and likely put me in a nursing home where I would be isolated and controllable. The casual way he said it made it somehow worse. This wasn't paranoia or exaggeration. This was fact, backed up by evidence, confirmed by professionals. So I let them proceed. Grandpa continued. I worked with David Chen to set up the charitable foundation. We recreated documents that looked exactly like the ones they wanted me to sign, but with one crucial difference. Instead of transferring everything to them personally, it transferred everything to the foundation. But they'll fight it, I said. They'll claim you tricked them, that it wasn't what you said it was. Grandpa smiled, and it was the saddest smile I had ever seen on his face. Let them try. Every document was witnessed by 3 independent attorneys. Every signature was notarized. Every step was documented on video. I was lucid, competent, and fully aware of what I was signing. He pulled out a tablet and showed me footage of the signing. Him, sitting in a lawyer's office, reading through every page carefully. A doctor there to evaluate his mental state. Multiple witnesses. Everything legal and airtight. They wanted a kingdom, Clara. They forgot who built it. He set the tablet down and looked at me with those clear blue eyes. But I didn't do this just to punish them. I did it to free you. Free me from what? From becoming like them. He reached across and took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. You have a good heart, sweetheart. A kind heart. You feel things deeply. You care about people. Those are gifts, not weaknesses. But growing up in that house, watching them operate, learning that love could be conditional and affection could be bought, I was terrified you would start to think that was normal. Tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. I don't understand why they're like this. When did it happen? When did they stop being human? Oh, honey, they're still human. That's what makes it so sad. He squeezed my hand. Humans are capable of extraordinary greed, especially when they convince themselves they deserve something. Your father was always a little entitled, even as a boy. I thought it was a phase. I thought he would grow out of it, but instead I enabled it. I gave him everything he wanted, thinking generosity would teach him generosity. I was wrong. So what happens now? Now they learn to live without my cushion. They have an apartment, basic support for 6 months, and after that, they're on their own. They'll need to work. They'll need to budget. They'll need to understand what most people deal with every day. That seems almost too kind. Grandpa's expression hardened slightly. I'm not interested in revenge, Clara. I'm interested in consequence. There's a difference. Revenge is about making them suffer. Consequence is about making them learn. He stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The foundation is real. It's going to do real good. Housing for veterans. Scholarships for kids who can't afford college. Medical research. All the things I always wanted to do but kept putting off because I thought I had more time. He turned back to me, and I want you to be part of it. Not just part of it, Clara. I want you to run it someday. I stood up, shocked. Grandpa, I'm 25. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know about heart. You know about integrity. The rest can be learned. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a key, old-fashioned and brass, clearly antique. This was the key to the first office I ever rented, back in 1962. I keep it to remember where I came from. I want you to have it now. I took the key, its weight surprising in my palm. I don't understand. It's not the key to anything physical anymore. That office is long gone. It's a symbol, Clara. It represents starting from nothing and building something meaningful. Not with money. Not with connections. But with work and values and purpose. He pulled out another document, this one official and embossed. This is the paperwork making you the deputy director of the foundation, effective immediately. Your first project is already funded, a housing initiative for homeless veterans in Los Angeles, 30 units, fully renovated, with support services. I stared at the document, at my name printed there in official letters. I don't know if I can do this. Neither did I when I started. But you will, because you care, and that's more important than knowing. He put his hands on my shoulders. Your parents wanted to inherit my money. I'm giving you something better, the opportunity to inherit my values. The choice is yours, Clara. You can walk away, go back to them, try to help them fix what they've broken. Or you can walk forward, into a life built on something real. I looked down at the key in my hand, then back up at my grandfather. They're my parents. I can't just abandon them. I'm not asking you to abandon them. I'm asking you not to drown with them. There's a difference between love and enabling. You can love them and still refuse to participate in their dysfunction. He was right. Deep down, I knew he was right. But it felt like a betrayal anyway, choosing this path, choosing him over them. They'll hate me, I whispered. Probably, for a while. But Clara, they already don't see you clearly. To them, you're either an asset or an obstacle. When you're neither, when you're just you, living your life and doing your work, they won't know what to do with you. Is that what happened with Dad? Did he become something you couldn't recognize? Grandpa's face crumpled slightly, showing his age and his pain. Your father was born during the hardest years of building the company. I wasn't around as much as I should have been. His mother, your grandmother, she did her best, but I was always working, always chasing the next deal. By the time I realized I had given him everything except time and attention, it was too late. He had learned to measure love in dollars. And Mom? Susan came from money, old money, the kind that's been passed down so many generations that no one remembers who actually earned it. She never had to want for anything, never had to struggle. So when your father married her, they created this perfect storm of entitlement. Two people who believed the world owed them comfort. He sighed deeply. I don't tell you this to excuse them, Clara. I tell you this so you understand. You had no power to change them. No one does. Change has to come from within, from hitting bottom hard enough to realize you need to climb back up. I spent the rest of that day with Grandpa, going over the foundation's work, meeting the staff, learning about the projects already in progress. By the time I left, the sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful for a day that had destroyed my family. I didn't go back to the house in Beverly Hills. I couldn't. Instead, I checked into a hotel, a modest one near the foundation offices, and spent the night staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. My phone buzzed constantly. Texts from my mother, increasingly frantic, calls from my father, which I let go to voicemail. Finally, around midnight, I turned it off completely. I needed silence. I needed space to think. The next morning, I went back to the house one last time. A moving truck was already there, 2 professional movers efficiently packing up my parents' belongings. Not Grandpa's things, I noticed. Those had already been removed, presumably to storage or the foundation offices, just the things my parents had bought in their brief time thinking they owned the place. My mother sat on the front steps, still in yesterday's clothes, her face puffy from crying. My father paced the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, trying one last desperate call to find a lawyer who would take their case. I walked past them both, went up to my old room and packed my things. Clothes, books, photos, the few meaningful possessions I had collected over 25 years. It all fit in 3 suitcases and 2 boxes. Not much to show for a lifetime, but somehow that felt appropriate, clean, unburdened. When I came back downstairs, my mother stood up. Clara, please, talk to him. Make him see reason. We're your parents. I set my bags down and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was 51 years old, still beautiful in that preserved way that money could buy. But her eyes were empty, hollowed out by greed and panic and the sudden realization that consequences were real. Mom, he's given you an apartment, 6 months of support, a chance to start over. That's more than you gave him when you abandoned him at the airport. We didn't abandon him, we gave him a ticket. You gave him a screenshot of a fully booked flight and drove away before he could even pick up his suitcase. My voice was calm, almost detached. You left an 87-year-old man alone in one of the busiest airports in the world, with no real way to get where you said he was going. Because you wanted to get back here and celebrate stealing from him. She flinched like I had slapped her. We were going to take care of you. All of this was for our family, for your future. No, I said quietly. It was for your comfort, your status, your ego. I was never part of the equation except as another justification for your greed. My father had finished his call and joined us. Your grandfather has poisoned you against us. Can't you see that? He's manipulating you just like he manipulated those lawyers. I almost laughed. The projection was stunning. Dad, Grandpa didn't have to poison me against you. You did that yourselves. Every text message Elena showed me, every recording, every piece of evidence of your plans, that was you. Your words, your choices. We're your parents, he shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. You owe us loyalty. I owe you nothing, I said, and the words felt like liberation. You're right, you're my parents. You gave me life. But that's where your claim ends. Love isn't owed, respect isn't owed, those things are earned. And you stopped earning them the moment you decided an old man's dignity was worth less than his money. I picked up my bags. One of the movers helped me carry them to my car, a old Honda that Grandpa had given me for college. Reliable, practical, nothing flashy. Unlike everything my parents had ever given me, it came with no strings attached. As I loaded the last box into my trunk, my mother called out one more time, "Where will you go?" I looked back at her. Somewhere honest. I drove away without looking back, leaving them standing in the driveway of a house that had never really been theirs, facing a future they had never imagined they would have to build themselves. The weeks that followed were a blur of learning and growth. I threw myself into the foundation's work, learning from the staff, meeting with the people we served, understanding what real need looked like. It was humbling and exhausting and the most fulfilling thing I had ever done. Grandpa was patient with me, answering my endless questions, guiding me through the complexities of nonprofit management. But he also stepped back, letting me make decisions, letting me fail sometimes, teaching me that mistakes were part of learning as long as you owned them and grew from them. I heard nothing from my parents for almost a month. Then, one day, my phone rang. It was my mother's number, but when I answered, it was my father's voice. "Clara, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "Not on the phone. Can you meet us? Please." Something in his voice was different, smaller, less certain. Against my better judgment, I agreed. They had asked to meet at a coffee shop in Burbank, near their new apartment. It was a far cry from the Beverly Hills restaurants they used to frequent. Simple, clean, full of people in work clothes, grabbing coffee before their shifts. I arrived first and ordered a simple black coffee. When my parents walked in, I almost didn't recognize them. My father wore jeans and a polo shirt, clothes I had never seen him in. My mother's hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of the heavy makeup she usually wore. They looked tired. They looked normal. They sat across from me, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We're not going to fight the transfer. Our lawyer, the one who finally agreed to look at the case, said we don't have a leg to stand on. Everything Oliver did was legal and documented." "I know," I said. "We've both found jobs," my mother added quietly. "Nothing glamorous. I'm working at a boutique in Studio City. Your father is doing consulting work for small businesses." "That's good," I said, meaning it. More silence. Then my father said, "We were wrong." The words hung in the air between us, simple and enormous. "We were wrong about a lot of things," he continued. "About your grandfather, about what mattered, about who we had become." He rubbed his face with both hands. "These past few weeks, having to actually work, having to budget, having to face people who know what we tried to do, it's been hell. But it's also been clarifying." My mother reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close. "We don't expect you to forgive us. We don't even know if we can forgive ourselves. But we wanted you to know that we're trying. We're trying to be better than we were." I studied them both, looking for signs of manipulation, for the angle. But all I saw was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. "I'm glad you're trying," I said carefully. "But trying isn't the same as succeeding. And even if you succeed, that doesn't erase what you did." "We know," my father said. "We're not asking for everything to go back to normal. We're just asking, can we talk? Sometimes? Can we work towards something even if it's not what we used to have?" I thought about Grandpa's words, about the difference between love and enabling, about how you could care for people without condoning their actions. I'll think about it, I said finally. But I need you to understand something. I'm not your daughter Clara anymore, the girl who went along with everything, who never questioned, who just wanted everyone to be happy. That person is gone. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, it has to be with who I actually am now. Who are you now? My mother asked, and she sounded genuinely curious. I'm the deputy director of a charitable foundation. I'm someone who works with homeless veterans and scholarship kids. I'm someone who believes that what you do matters more than what you own. I'm someone who learned that love without respect is worthless, and respect has to be earned every day. My father nodded slowly. We'd like to get to know that person, if she'll let us. We talked for another hour, not about the past, but about the present. They told me about their jobs, about learning to take the bus, about the strange freedom that came with not having to maintain appearances anymore. I told them about the foundation's work, about the veteran housing project, about how satisfying it was to solve real problems instead of creating artificial ones. When we finally parted ways, there was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful hugs, just a tentative agreement to meet again in a few weeks, to keep talking, to see if something new could grow from the ashes of what had burned down. I drove back to the foundation offices, where Grandpa was waiting in his corner office on the 52nd floor. How did it go? He asked. Strange. Sad. Maybe a little hopeful. I sat down across from him. They've changed. Or they're trying to. I'm not sure if it's real or if it's just shock. Time will tell, Grandpa said. But I'm proud of you for meeting them. For not writing them off completely but also not giving them everything they wanted. You taught me that, the difference between boundaries and cruelty. He smiled. I've been thinking about something. The foundation's annual gala is coming up in 6 weeks. Big event, lots of donors, lots of press. I'd like you to speak. My stomach dropped. Grandpa, I'm not ready for that. I've only been here a few months. You're more ready than you think, and besides, it's time for people to know that this foundation has a future beyond me. I won't be around forever, Clara. Don't say that. It's true. I'm 87 years old. I've had a good run, better than most. But you need to start stepping into leadership now, while I'm still here to support you. Over the next 6 weeks, I poured myself into preparing, working with the Foundation's development director to understand our impact metrics, meeting with program managers to learn the details of every initiative, visiting sites, talking to beneficiaries, understanding the real human cost of homelessness and poverty and lack of opportunity. The gala was held at the Millennium Biltmore Hotel downtown, in the Crystal Ballroom that had once hosted Academy Awards ceremonies. The guest list read like a who's who of Los Angeles philanthropy. Business leaders, celebrities, politicians, all gathered to support the foundation's work. I wore a simple navy dress, elegant but understated, my grandmother's pearls. The watch Grandpa had given me. No designer labels, nothing flashy. I wanted to look professional, capable, serious. Grandpa gave the opening remarks, talking about the foundation's first year, about the lives we had touched, about the work still ahead. Then he did something I hadn't expected. Before we move on to dinner, he said, his voice carrying through the ornate ballroom, I want to introduce you to someone who represents everything this foundation stands for. Someone who chose compassion over comfort, integrity over inheritance, purpose over privilege. He looked directly at me, and I felt my heart start to race. Clara Steele is my granddaughter. She's also the foundation's deputy director and the future of everything we're building here. She could have chosen an easier path. Lord knows she had options. But she chose this work because she believes in it. Clara, would you come up here? The walk to the podium felt like miles. Hundreds of faces turned toward me, some curious, some skeptical, some encouraging. I took my place beside Grandpa, and he squeezed my hand once before stepping back. I looked out at the crowd and saw, in the back of the room, 2 figures standing apart from the elegant guests. My parents, dressed simply, clearly uncomfortable but present. They had come. They had shown up. I took a breath and began to speak. My grandfather just said I chose this work. That's not entirely true. This work chose me, in a way I didn't expect and couldn't have anticipated. I told them about the veteran housing project, about meeting a 63-year-old man named Marcus who had served in Vietnam and spent the last 15 years on the streets, about how he had cried when we gave him the keys to his apartment, his first real home in over a decade. I told them about a scholarship recipient named Jasmine, first in her family to go to college, studying engineering at USC on a foundation grant, about how she wanted to build better infrastructure in underserved communities because she had grown up in one. I told them about the medical research we were funding, the community centers we were supporting, the libraries we were helping to keep open. And then I said something I hadn't planned, something that came from a place deeper than preparation. A few months ago, I learned a hard lesson about family. I learned that blood relation doesn't automatically create obligation, that love has to be accompanied by respect, that generosity without wisdom is just enabling. I could see my parents in the back, their faces pale in the dim light. I learned that real legacy isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you create, not for yourself, but for others. Not to be remembered, but to make a difference. I looked at Grandpa, standing to the side of the stage, his eyes bright with tears. My grandfather could have left his fortune to his family. Instead, he left it to the world. And in doing so, he gave me something more valuable than money. He gave me purpose. He gave me the chance to be part of something larger than myself. He gave me the opportunity to measure my life not in possessions but in impact. The applause started slowly, then built. People stood. And in the back of the room, I saw my mother's shoulders shaking with tears, and my father put his arm around her, and they stayed standing even as the applause died down. After the speeches, after dinner, after the presentations, and the thank yous and the photographs, I found my parents near the coat check. They looked out of place, overwhelmed, but they had stayed for the entire event. "You were wonderful," my mother said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." "We both are," my father added. "What you're doing here, the person you've become, it's remarkable." "Thank you for coming," I said. "I know this wasn't easy." "We almost didn't," my father admitted. "We weren't sure we'd be welcome, weren't sure you'd want us here." "I wasn't sure either," I said honestly. "But I'm glad you came. I'm glad you heard what this work actually is." My mother took a small envelope from her purse. "We wanted to contribute. It's not much, just $200. It's what we could afford. But we wanted to do something." I took the envelope, and the weight of it was more significant than its contents. It represented a shift, a choice to participate in giving rather than taking. "This means more than you know," I said. "Not because of the amount, but because of what it represents." We stood there for a moment, 3 people connected by blood and history and trauma, trying to figure out how to move forward. "Would you like to have coffee sometime next week?" I asked. "Not to talk about the past, but about the future?" They both nodded, and we exchanged a brief, awkward hug before they left. Grandpa found me a few minutes later, watching the cleaning crew start to break down the event. "That was brave," he said, inviting them to stay connected. "You taught me that," I said. "That consequences don't have to mean cruelty, that boundaries don't have to mean abandonment. You're learning fast." He handed me a small box, gift-wrapped in silver paper. "I was going to give you this later, but now feels right." I opened it carefully. Inside was a key, but not the antique brass one he had given me before. This one was modern, electronic, attached to a key fob. "What's this?" "The master key to the foundation offices, and to the penthouse apartment on the 51st floor. I had it renovated for you. If you want it. You've been living in that hotel for months. It's time you had a real home." I stared at the key, understanding what it represented. This wasn't just about an apartment. It was about commitment, about choosing this life permanently, about accepting that my future was here, in this work, with these values. "Grandpa, I don't know what to say." Say yes. Say you'll take the job permanently. Say you'll carry this forward when I'm gone." "You're not going anywhere," I protested, but my voice cracked. He pulled me into a hug, and I was shocked at how fragile he felt. When had he gotten so thin? When had he started to seem small? "I'm 87, sweetheart. I've had a good run, but it's your turn now. And I need to know that everything I built, everything that matters, is in hands that will honor it. Your hands." I held him tight, this man who had taught me what real strength looked like, what real generosity meant, what real love required. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes to all of it." 3 years later, I stood in the same crystal ballroom, but this time I stood alone at the podium. Grandpa had passed 6 months earlier, peacefully in his sleep, in the home he had loved, surrounded by photos of his wife and his granddaughter, and the thousands of people whose lives the foundation had touched. The ballroom was packed. Over 800 people had come to the annual gala, nearly double the attendance from that first year. The foundation had grown exponentially. The Veteran Housing Project now had locations in 5 cities. We had endowed chairs at 3 universities. Our medical research had contributed to a breakthrough in Alzheimer's treatment. And my parents were in the audience, not in the back this time but at a table near the front. They had continued working their modest jobs, continued living in their small apartment. We had dinner together once a month, conversations that were still sometimes awkward but increasingly real. They volunteered with the foundation now, my father helping small business owners, who reminded him of where he should have started, my mother working with women re-entering the workforce after hardship. They weren't the parents I had grown up with, but they were trying to be better than the people they had been. I looked out at the crowd and began to speak. 3 years ago, my grandfather stood on this stage and introduced me to all of you. He said I represented the future of this foundation. At the time, I was terrified. I felt inadequate. I felt like an imposter. I paused, letting myself feel the full weight of the moment. Grandpa taught me that legacy isn't written in wealth. It's written in choices. In the decisions we make when no one is watching, in the values we refuse to compromise even when it costs us. I told them about Oliver Steele, about the man who had built an empire but measured his success in lives improved rather than dollars earned. About how he had faced betrayal from his own family but responded with consequences rather than cruelty. About how he had used his final years, not to accumulate more but to give away everything he had built, to ensure it would continue serving others long after he was gone. He left me something more valuable than money, I said, my voice strong despite the tears on my cheeks. He left me a blueprint for how to live. He showed me that the measure of a life isn't what you acquire but what you contribute. Not what you keep but what you give away. Not who you were born to be but who you choose to become. I pulled out the old brass key he had given me that first day, the one from his first office in 1962. I had it on a chain around my neck now, hidden under my dress. I took it off and held it up. This key doesn't open anything anymore. The door it once fit disappeared decades ago, but it reminds me every day that everything worth building starts from nothing. That every empire begins with a single choice. That every legacy starts with one person deciding to do something meaningful. I looked at my parents, and they were both crying. I looked at the 800 faces watching me, waiting to hear what came next. The Oliver Steele Foundation doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us, to everyone who believes that we can build a better world. One person, one program, one choice at a time. Grandpa started this work. It's our job to continue it. The applause was thunderous. People stood, tears streaming down many faces. And in that moment, I understood what Grandpa had known all along. This was never about money. It was never about property or possessions or inheritance in any traditional sense. It was about something infinitely more valuable and infinitely harder to achieve. It was about becoming the kind of person who could carry forward what mattered, who could choose purpose over comfort, who could face betrayal and respond with wisdom, who could love without enabling, who could set boundaries without cruelty, who could take broken things and make them whole. After the gala ended, after the last guest left, and the ballroom was quiet again, I found myself on the rooftop terrace of the foundation building, looking out over Los Angeles. The city sparkled below me, millions of lights representing millions of lives, each one carrying its own struggles and triumphs and possibilities. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. Your grandfather would be proud. We are too. I smiled, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and looked up at the stars barely visible through the city's glow. I hope I'm making you proud. Grandpa, I whispered to the night. I hope you know that everything you gave me, every lesson, every moment, it wasn't wasted. I'm carrying it forward, I promise. The wind picked up, warm and gentle, and for just a moment I could swear I heard his voice, that familiar rumble, saying what he had said to me so many times. You're doing just fine, sweetheart. You're doing just fine. I stood there for a long time, the brass key warm against my palm, the city stretching endlessly before me, and I finally understood what real inheritance meant. It wasn't about what you received. It was about what you did with it, how you transformed loss into purpose, how you turned pain into growth, how you took the broken pieces of a shattered family and rebuilt something new, not by ignoring the cracks, but by learning from them. My parents had wanted a kingdom. They had forgotten who built it. But in losing everything, they had found something more valuable, a chance to rebuild themselves, a chance to matter for reasons beyond money. And I had inherited something far greater than wealth. I had inherited wisdom, purpose, and the chance to spend my life making a difference. That was the real legacy, Not what was given, but what was earned. Not what was taken, but what was created. Not the empire itself, but the values that built it. And as I stood there on that rooftop, looking out over a city full of people who needed hope and help and second chances, I knew exactly what to do with my inheritance. I would give it away, just like Grandpa had. Not all at once, but every single day, one choice at a time, one life touched, one program funded, one person given a chance they otherwise wouldn't have had. Because that's what real inheritance meant. Not keeping what you were given, but multiplying it. Not holding tight, but opening your hands. Not an ending, but a beginning. And the work, the beautiful, difficult, meaningful work, was just getting started. I turned to head back inside when I heard the elevator doors open behind me. My mother stepped out onto the terrace, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the evening breeze. She looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure she belonged here, in this space that represented everything she had once tried to steal. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said softly. "I saw you come up here, and I thought maybe you could use some company." I gestured to the space beside me at the railing, and she joined me, both of us looking out over the city lights. "Your speech tonight," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "When you talked about legacy, about choices, I kept thinking about all the choices your father and I made, all the wrong ones." "Mom, you don't have to." "Please," she interrupted gently. "Let me say this. I need to say this." I nodded, giving her space. "When we dropped your grandfather at that airport, when we drove away celebrating what we thought we had won, I remember feeling this momentary flash of doubt. Just for a second, I wondered if we had crossed a line we couldn't come back from, but I pushed it down. I told myself we deserved this, that he owed us this." She wiped at her eyes. "I was so focused on what we didn't have that I couldn't see what we were throwing away." She turned to face me, and in the dim light, I could see how much she had aged in 3 years, not just physically, but in her eyes. They held a depth they had never had before, a weariness that came from truly understanding consequences. "Your father and I, we've been going to therapy, separately and together. Trying to understand how we became those people, trying to figure out how to live with what we did." "That's good," I said, meaning it. "That takes courage." "It takes desperation," she corrected with a sad smile. "But maybe that's where courage comes from sometimes. From being so broken, you have no choice but to try to put yourself back together." She reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph, its edges worn from handling. It showed a much younger version of my father, maybe in his 20s, laughing with Grandpa at what looked like a construction site. Both of them wore hard hats and work clothes, covered in dust, their arms around each other's shoulders. "I found this when we were packing up the apartment last week. We're moving to a new place, a little bigger, in Pasadena. Still modest, but we've saved enough for a down payment. Your father's consulting business is doing well. Honestly, well, this time." She ran her finger over the photograph. "Your grandfather took Richard to every job site when he was young, taught him about building, about business, about integrity. Richard knew better. He knew what mattered. He just forgot, or chose to forget. I don't know which is worse." "Maybe it doesn't matter which is worse," I said gently. "Maybe what matters is that you're both trying to remember now." She looked at me with such gratitude that I had to look away. "You're more generous than we deserve, Clara. You always have been." "I'm not generous, Mom. I'm just trying to do what Grandpa taught me. To separate the people I love from the actions I can't condone. To hold space for the possibility that people can change while still protecting myself from who they used to be. That's very wise for someone so young." "I had a good teacher." I paused, then added, "And I'm learning every day what it means to forgive without forgetting. To move forward without pretending the past didn't happen." My mother reached out and squeezed my hand, just briefly, respecting the boundaries I had set over the past 3 years. "Your grandfather's funeral, when you gave the eulogy, you said something that stayed with me. You said that he taught you that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference." "I remember." "I understand that now. You could have cut us off completely. You could have treated us with the indifference we probably earned. But you didn't. You stayed engaged, even when it was hard, even when we didn't deserve it. That's love, Clara, real love. The kind we should have shown your grandfather, the kind he showed you." We stood in silence for a moment, and then she said, "There's something else I need to tell you. Your father and I have been saving money. Not much, we don't make that much. But we've been putting aside $100 every month for the past 2 years. It's in an account we set up specifically for the foundation. She pulled out a bank statement and handed it to me. I could see the deposits, regular as clockwork, never missing a month. 24 deposits totaling $2,400. We want it to go toward the veteran housing project. Specifically, we want it to sponsor one apartment for 1 year in your grandfather's name. Not in ours. We don't want recognition. We just want to do something, anything, that honors what he tried to teach us and what we failed to learn until it was too late. My throat tightened. $2,400 wouldn't have meant anything to my parents 3 years ago. They would have spent that on a single dinner without thinking twice. But now, saved slowly over 2 years from modest paychecks, carefully set aside instead of spent on themselves, it represented something profound. Mom, this is significant. It's not enough. It'll never be enough to make up for what we did, but it's a start. It's us trying to be part of the solution instead of the problem. I folded the bank statement carefully and tucked it into my clutch. I'll make sure it's used exactly as you want. And Mom, thank you. Not just for the money, but for showing up. For doing the work, for trying. She smiled, genuine and sad at the same time. We're trying to teach ourselves what your grandfather tried to teach your father 40 years ago. It's harder learning it at 54 than it would have been at 24, but better late than never, right? Right. She turned to leave, then paused. Clara, one more thing. Your grandfather left you that brass key, the one from his first office. Your father wanted you to know that he has something similar. A photograph of himself and his father at that first office, the day Oliver Steele opened it. Richard was just a baby, maybe 6 months old, and Oliver is holding him, both of them standing in front of this tiny door with steel construction painted on the window. I didn't know that photo existed. Your father keeps it in his wallet now. He looks at it every day, he told me, to remember where his father started, to remember what matters, to remember the man he should have been. After she left, I stayed on the terrace a while longer. The city continued its endless movement below, cars streaming along freeways, lights flickering in windows where people were living their own complicated stories of loss and redemption and hope. I thought about that photograph of my father as a baby, held in Grandpa's arms at the very beginning of an empire, about how every story starts with possibility, with the potential for greatness or failure or something in between. About how Grandpa had tried to teach my father the right lessons, and my father had chosen wrongly, and now, decades later, was trying to find his way back. About how maybe that was the real story all along. Not the betrayal, not the revenge, not even the redemption, but the journey itself, the messy, complicated, painful journey of people trying to become better than they were. I pulled out my phone and opened my photos, scrolling until I found the one I was looking for. It was from Grandpa's funeral, taken by a friend when I wasn't aware. I was standing at his graveside, and standing a respectful distance behind me were my parents, their heads bowed, my father's hand on my mother's shoulder. We weren't together. We weren't reconciled in any fairy tale sense, but we were in the same frame, all of us carrying our grief and our regrets and our desperate hopes for tomorrow. That felt like enough. Not perfect, but honest. Not healed, but healing. I looked up at the stars one more time and whispered, I'm learning, Grandpa. I'm learning that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, that boundaries don't mean abandonment, that love can coexist with accountability, that people can change if they're willing to do the work. That legacy isn't what you leave behind, but what you inspire others to become. The wind carried my words away into the night, and I chose to believe he heard them, wherever he was. That he knew his lessons had taken root, not just in me, but somehow, miraculously, in the son who had lost his way and was now stumbling back toward the light. I took one last look at the city, at the foundation building beneath my feet, at the work that would consume my life in the best possible way. Then I headed back inside, back to the elevator, back down to the 50th floor where my team was waiting to debrief the gala, to plan the next initiative, to continue the work that Grandpa had started and that I would carry forward. But as the elevator descended, I realized something that made me smile despite the tears still drying on my cheeks. Grandpa's real revenge hadn't been taking away my parents' money. It hadn't been exposing their greed or forcing them into humbler circumstances. His real revenge had been this, showing them what they could have been, what they could have been part of, what they had thrown away in exchange for empty walls and hollow victories. And then, most cruelly and most kindly at the same time, giving them just enough rope to hang themselves with, just enough consequence to break them down, and just enough support to let them build themselves back up again if they chose to do the work. He had given them nothing and everything. He had taken away their kingdom and handed them a path to actual redemption. That was the genius of it. That was the love behind it. He could have destroyed them completely. He could have left them with nothing, not even the modest apartment, not even the chance to rebuild. But he hadn't, because that would have been revenge, and Grandpa was never interested in revenge. He was interested in teaching, in consequences, in the hard, painful lessons that sometimes save people from themselves. The elevator doors opened on the 50th floor, and I stepped out into the bustling office, into the work, into the life I had chosen and that had chosen me. And I carried with me the weight of that brass key around my neck, the weight of my parents' stumbling journey towards something better, the weight of 800 people who had attended tonight's gala, the weight of thousands of lives touched by the Foundation's work, and the weightless, powerful presence of a man who had taught me that the best revenge is living a life of meaning. Not for spite, not for show, but because it's the only thing worth doing. I smiled, rolled up my sleeves, and got back to work.